I'm 28, and I recently discovered that my parents had stolen my $120,000 MBA fund to help my sister, Emily, 35, buy a house with her fiancé, David, 37. The whole situation feels surreal, and I'm still trying to process the depth of their betrayal. Let me take you through this nightmare from the beginning. My grandparents, on my dad's side, were quite wealthy and always valued education above all else. They were old school in the best way possible. They believed in saving money, working hard, and investing in the future. They lived in a different state, so I didn't get to see them often, but whenever we talked or met, they made it clear how much they cared about my future. I remember my grandmother always saying, "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you." Oh, the irony of that statement now. 3 years ago, my grandfather passed away after a brief illness. It was devastating, but we still had Grandma. She was the rock of the family, always sending thoughtful cards and care packages, remembering every birthday and achievement. Last year, we lost her too. The day she passed, I found myself sitting in my apartment, looking through all the letters she'd sent me over the years. Each one contained some life wisdom and usually a small check with a note like, "For your education fund." I had no idea then that she and Grandpa had been building something much bigger for my future. When their will was read, the distribution seemed fair at first. My parents inherited their house and savings. Emily got all of Grandma's jewelry, worth tens of thousands, and family heirlooms, and I was left a significant education fund, specifically for my MBA studies. The will explicitly stated that this money was to be used solely for my education, and since I was already working, my parents were designated to manage it until I needed it. At the time, I felt grateful that my grandparents had thought so carefully about my future. I didn't think for a second that my parents would mess with the fund, but looking back, I should have seen the warning signs. From my earliest memories, Emily has always been the golden child in our family. It's hard to explain without sounding bitter, but she was the one my parents adored. Everything she did was amazing. She was so talented, so hardworking, so special. I still remember my high school graduation. I was valedictorian, had a full scholarship to college, and had just won a prestigious science competition. During my speech, I looked out at the audience and saw my parents on their phones, barely paying attention. Later that evening, when Emily, who had dropped out of college twice by then, announced she was thinking about trying teaching, they were overjoyed. "You're just so good with children," they gushed. My achievements that day were acknowledged with a brief, "Good job, keep it up." This pattern continued throughout my life. I worked hard, graduated summa cum laude, and landed a job at a prestigious corporation. I've spent the last 6 years climbing the corporate ladder, earning recognition and respect from my colleagues and superiors. I'm currently a senior project manager, leading a team of 15 people and handling multi-million-dollar accounts. But to my parents, I was always just the practical one, the one who had it easy because I was naturally smart. Meanwhile, Emily bounced between careers before landing in teaching. She's now a kindergarten principal at a small private school, and David is a head zookeeper at our local zoo. They're nice enough people, and I don't have any personal issues with them. They're good at their jobs and seem happy, but their combined income is modest at best. For the past year, Emily and David had been talking nonstop about needing to buy a house. Every family dinner turned into a discussion about real estate prices and how they were throwing money away on rent. They'd look at houses way above their price range and complain about how unfair the market was. My parents would nod sympathetically and say things like, "You deserve a nice house," and "It's so hard for young people these days." Mind you, Emily and David are in their mid-30s, but somehow they're still young people who need help. About a month ago, I started preparing my MBA program applications. This wasn't a sudden decision. I've been planning this move for years. I've researched programs extensively, built my career strategically, and maintained a perfect track record at work. My goal is to get into a top-tier program that will help me transition into executive leadership positions at my current company. All the C-level executives have MBAs from prestigious schools, and I'm determined to follow that path. One evening, I brought up the education fund with my parents. I needed to know exactly how much was available because application fees alone for top MBA programs can run into thousands of dollars. Their reaction should have been my first real warning sign. My dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair and said, "Don't worry about it. We'll talk when the time comes." My mom quickly added, "Just focus on your applications for now." Then they immediately changed the subject to Emily and David's house hunting. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe they were just being disorganized about the paperwork. But something felt off. A week later, I brought it up again, this time more directly. I explained that I needed to know the funds were there because I was planning to apply to several top programs and needed to budget accordingly. That's when they dropped the bomb. My mom, in the most casual tone imaginable, said, "We used the MBA money for Emily. She and Nathan are buying a house." I stared at her, thinking I must have misheard. When I asked her to repeat herself, my dad chimed in, saying something about how Emily needed it right now, and it wouldn't be fair for me to get a free ride when Emily had worked so hard with student loans. I lost it. I'm not proud of how I reacted, but years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. I demanded to know how they could do this to me, how they could steal the money my grandparents had specifically left for my education. I pointed out that it was illegal. The will had been explicit about how that money should be used. My mom just rolled her eyes like I was being dramatic. "You'll figure it out," she said. "It's not like you can't take out loans like everyone else." They acted like they had done nothing wrong, like my grandparents' wishes and my future didn't matter at all. That's when I mentioned legal action. I know I'm not a lawyer, but what they did was clearly illegal. And you know what they did? They laughed. Not just a chuckle, they actually laughed out loud. My dad looked me straight in the eye and said, with a sneer, "With what money? You can't even afford a lawyer." My mom added, "Don't be ridiculous. This is family business." I can't describe how humiliated I felt in that moment. I just stood there, stunned. It hit me all at once how they had always seen me, as an afterthought, someone whose future they could sacrifice for Emily's benefit. Despite my academic achievements, my successful career, my financial independence, none of it mattered to them. I would always be the lesser child. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandparents and how they had trusted my parents to do the right thing. They had no idea what my home life was really like. I never told anyone about how I was treated because it didn't seem worth it. It's not like I was being abused, right? They weren't violent. They just didn't care about me the way they cared about Emily. The next morning, I went to work early and requested a private meeting with my boss, Mr. Thompson. He's not just any boss. He's been a mentor to me since I joined the company. He's watched me work my way up from a junior position to leading my own team, and he's always supported my career aspirations. More importantly, he has a background in corporate law and maintains connections with top legal firms. I also planned to reach out to Uncle Jake, my dad's cousin. He's a successful businessman who always seemed to see through my parents' favoritism. He wasn't around much when I was growing up, but whenever he visited, he would take a genuine interest in my achievements and career plans. He also happens to be the only family member who's more successful and influential than my parents. I never wanted things to get ugly, but when my parents laughed at me, something inside me snapped. They thought I was powerless because I've always been the quiet one, the reasonable one who never made waves. But they were about to learn that the daughter they always underestimated wasn't so powerless after all. The meeting with Mr. Thompson went even better than I hoped. He not only offered his full support, but immediately connected me with his friend at Wilson & Partners, one of the city's top law firms. "This isn't just about the money," he told me. "It's about honoring your grandparents' wishes and holding your parents accountable." The meeting with the lawyers was eye-opening. They confirmed that my parents' actions constituted a clear breach of fiduciary duty and violation of the will's terms. What surprised me most was learning that my parents could face criminal charges for their actions. The lawyers also discovered something disturbing. My parents had started transferring the money to Emily's account months ago, long before they admitted it to me. But the real game changer was Uncle Jake's involvement. After I reached out to him on LinkedIn, He called me within hours. His response was beyond anything I could have hoped for. "I always knew your parents played favorites," he said. "But stealing from their own daughter? That crosses every line. Don't worry about the legal fees. I'm handling everything." Uncle Jake wasn't just talking. He took immediate action. He hired a forensic accountant to trace every penny of the stolen funds and enlisted a team of lawyers specializing in estate law. Within days, they had compiled enough evidence to prove my parents had systematically drained the education fund over several months. The first confrontation happened last Friday. My parents' lawyer contacted me, trying to negotiate a family settlement. They offered to help with some of the MBA costs if I dropped any legal action. Uncle Jake's response was brutal. Either return the full amount with interest and penalties, or face criminal charges. There will be no negotiation. My parents' reaction was priceless. They started bombarding me with messages. "How could you involve outsiders in family matters? We were going to help you eventually. You're destroying this family." I forwarded everything to Uncle Jake's legal team without responding. That's when he revealed phase 2 of his plan. He wasn't just going after the money. He was pushing for a full investigation into my parents' financial dealings, suggesting there might be other improprieties we didn't know about yet. Emily finally broke her silence yesterday. She sent me a long email claiming she had no idea where the house money came from. "Mom and Dad said they had savings set aside for us," she wrote. "I never thought they would steal your money." She ended by asking me to be reasonable and find a family solution. I showed her email to Uncle Jake. His response? Forward it to the lawyers. It's evidence that she knew about the money after the fact, but made no effort to return it. That makes her complicit. The most satisfying moment came this morning. My parents' lawyer called Uncle Jake in a panic. Apparently, the forensic accountant discovered that my parents had begun transferring funds even before my grandmother's death, using their power of attorney. This could escalate the charges significantly. My parents are now desperately trying to backtrack. Mom left a tearful voicemail begging me to call them, saying they'll figure out a way to repay the money. Dad sent an email admitting they may have made a mistake, but still insisted they were just trying to help the family. Uncle Jake's advice was clear. Don't respond to anything. Let them panic. They laughed at you when you were vulnerable. Now it's their turn to feel powerless. Mr. Thompson has been incredibly supportive through all of this. He's already approved my leave of absence for when I start my MBA program, and he's writing a glowing recommendation letter. "You're showing remarkable composure," he told me today. "Not many people could handle this situation with such professionalism." The legal team is preparing to file formal charges next week, unless my parents return the full amount plus penalties. Uncle Jake estimates they'll need to sell some assets to cover everything, but as he put it, that's their problem, not yours. I'm staying with a friend until this is resolved. My parents tried showing up at my apartment, but the building security had been instructed not to let them in. Uncle Jake also hired a private investigator to document any attempts they make to contact me, which could be used as evidence of harassment if needed. This whole situation feels like a whirlwind. It's exhausting, but also strangely empowering. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm truly standing up for myself, and with Uncle Jake and Mr. Thompson in my corner, I know I'm not alone. It's not just about the money anymore. It's about justice, about honoring my grandparents' memory, and about finally breaking free from the role my parents always tried to force me into. They wanted me to be the quiet, obedient daughter who always puts her own needs last. But I'm done with that. I'm ready to fight for my future, and I'm not going to let anyone stand in my way. It's been a few weeks since my last update, and things have escalated dramatically. The forensic investigation has uncovered far more than we initially expected. The first bombshell dropped during our initial court filing. Uncle Jake's team discovered that my parents hadn't just stolen my MBA fund, they had also been manipulating their power of attorney over my grandmother's accounts during her final month. The evidence shows they were systematically moving money around, preparing to funnel it to Emily long before my grandmother passed away. Their lawyer's face during the first hearing was priceless. He clearly had no idea about the extent of their financial misconduct. When our legal team presented the documented timeline of transactions, He actually asked for a recess to confer with my parents. I later learned that he had confronted them about withholding information from him, and he's now considering withdrawing from the case. The most shocking revelation came from my grandmother's former caregiver. She reached out to Uncle Jake after seeing our legal notice in the estate records. Apparently, my grandmother had specifically discussed the MBA fund with my parents multiple times during her final months, making it crystal clear that the money was solely for my education. The caregiver even had notes documenting these conversations. She'd been keeping a care log that included all family discussions. Emily's involvement has also taken an interesting turn. When she realized the legal implications of accepting stolen money, she hired her own lawyer. This created a rift between her and our parents because they expected her to stand with the family. Her lawyer advised her to distance herself from the situation, which sent my parents into a panic. The house situation has become particularly messy. Since the down payment came from stolen funds, the purchase is now under legal scrutiny. Emily and David's mortgage lender has been notified of the situation, and they're reviewing the loan application. If my parents lied on any of the financial documents they co-signed, it could trigger a fraud investigation. Uncle Jake's team also uncovered something unexpected. My parents had been telling extended family members that I had agreed to give my MBA fund to Emily. They'd been spinning this narrative for months, apparently preparing their defense in case anyone questioned the money transfer. Several relatives have now come forward with emails and messages from my parents, all pushing this false narrative. The most satisfying development came during the deposition. My father tried maintaining his arrogant attitude until Uncle Jake's lawyer presented evidence of their premeditated plan. Watching him squirm as he tried to explain their actions was incredibly vindicating. My mother broke down entirely, admitting they never intended to replace the money they took. Their attempts at damage control have been almost comical. They're now trying to claim they were confused about the will's terms, despite multiple documented conversations with my grandmother and her lawyers. Their new lawyer, the third one since two have already quit, is desperately trying to negotiate a settlement. Our legal team laid out the final terms, making it clear there was no room for negotiation. They would need to repay every penny they stole, with interest accumulating from the day they first touched the money. On top of that, they'd be responsible for covering all our legal expenses, including the forensic investigation costs, which had grown substantial. We also demanded they provide a formal written admission of their wrongdoing, no more gaslighting or trying to spin the narrative. Finally, and this was non-negotiable, they would have to sign a legally binding agreement to cease all contact with me. No more surprise visits, no more manipulative messages, no more using relatives as messengers. My parents' social standing is crumbling. Word has gotten out in their community, and several of their friends have reached out to me privately to express their shock. My mother's bridge club asked her to step down as treasurer, and my father's golf club is reviewing his membership. It turns out people aren't comfortable associating with someone who would steal from their own child. Emily's situation is deteriorating too. Her school's board of directors has called a meeting to discuss her position, concerned about having a principal who was involved in financial misconduct. David's zoo is conducting an ethics review because they co-signed loan documents that might contain fraudulent information. The most recent development is particularly sweet. Remember how my parents laughed when I mentioned legal action? Well, Uncle Jake's team just filed a motion to freeze their assets to prevent any further financial manipulation. Their lawyer called within hours, practically begging for a settlement discussion. Uncle Jake remains ruthless in his approach. When my parents tried appealing to him about family loyalty, he responded with a scathing email that he CC'd to the entire extended family. Family loyalty. You lost any right to talk about loyalty when you stole from your daughter and laughed in her face. Get ready to face the consequences of your actions. I've maintained complete radio silence with my parents, which is driving them crazy. They've resorted to having friends and relatives try to reach out on their behalf, but each attempt just provides more evidence for our harassment claim. Their desperation is becoming more evident by the day. It's been 4 months since my last update, and I can finally share the conclusion of this saga. The final court proceedings have ended, and the results are more devastating for my parents than any of us anticipated. Let me break down how justice was finally served. First, Let me share the most satisfying moment. The final hearing, when my parents realized they had absolutely no way out. Their facade finally cracked. The judge was particularly harsh in her final statement, calling their actions a calculated betrayal of not only their daughter, but also their own parents' final wishes. She specifically mentioned how their laughter at my initial legal threat demonstrated a disturbing level of moral corruption. The financial penalties were severe. Beyond returning my MBA fund with interest, they were ordered to pay punitive damages that amounted to almost double the original sum. The judge cited their malicious intent and persistent attempts to deceive the court as justification for the harsh penalty. Here's where it gets interesting. To pay these penalties, my parents had to sell their house. Yes, the same house they inherited from my grandparents. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They're now renting a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a significant downgrade from their previous lifestyle. Their social fall has been spectacular. Their country club membership? Revoked. Their positions on various community boards? Gone. My mother's social circle, which she spent decades cultivating, has completely disintegrated. It turns out that stealing from your child and lying about it doesn't play well in upper-middle-class suburban society. The professional consequences have been equally severe. My father, who prided himself on his business reputation, has been forced to take early retirement. No one wants to do business with someone who's been legally proven to have stolen from their own child's inheritance. His former colleagues now avoid him at local businesses. My mother had to resign from her volunteer positions at the local charity organizations she once led. The final blow came when their church, where they'd been prominent members for 20 years, asked them to step down from all leadership roles. As Uncle Jake put it, they've become social pariahs in their own community. But perhaps the most significant development involves Emily and David, their dream house. They lost it. The mortgage company rescinded their loan approval after discovering the down payment came from stolen funds. They're now facing their own legal issues for knowingly accepting stolen money. Emily's career has imploded. The school board unanimously voted to terminate her position as principal. Their official statement cited ethical concerns and loss of community trust. She's now struggling to find even entry-level teaching positions as the story has spread throughout the local education community. David didn't fare much better. The zoo placed him on administrative leave, pending an investigation into his role in the financial misconduct. While he wasn't directly involved in stealing the money, his signature on loan documents containing fraudulent information has raised serious ethical concerns. Their relationship couldn't survive the stress. Last week, David moved out of their apartment. Emily blamed him for not being more supportive during the crisis, while he accused her of being just like her parents. They're now in the process of ending their engagement. Uncle Jake's strategy of complete legal and social destruction worked better than anyone expected. When my parents tried making one final appeal to family loyalty, he arranged for a family meeting, not to reconcile, but to lay out every detail of their actions in front of the entire extended family. During this meeting, he presented a timeline of their deception, including the fake documents they had created and the lies they had told various family members. The reaction was unanimous disgust. Several relatives who had initially tried to mediate the situation now openly condemn my parents. The most telling moment came when my mother's sister, who had always been one of their strongest supporters, stood up and said, "I don't even recognize who you are anymore." That meeting effectively ended any remaining family support they might have had. As for me, I've emerged from this stronger than ever. The full amount of my MBA fund has been restored, plus substantial damages. I've been accepted into a top-tier MBA program with a merit scholarship. Mr. Thompson wrote a glowing recommendation letter highlighting how I handled this crisis with remarkable professionalism and integrity. My company has been incredibly supportive. They've approved my leave of absence for the MBA program and even offered me a guaranteed executive position upon graduation. Mr. Thompson told me that how I handled this situation proved I had the judgment and fortitude needed for senior leadership. Uncle Jake has become a true mentor. He's introduced me to his business network and is already talking about potential investment opportunities we could work on together after I complete my MBA. "You've proven you have the backbone for business," he told me. "Your grandparents would be proud." I've moved to a luxury apartment in a secure building where my parents can't reach me. The doorman has their pictures and strict instructions never to let them in. I've blocked their numbers and emails, and any communication attempts now go straight to our legal team. The final twist of the knife. My parents' new apartment is right next to the zoo where David used to work. Every day, they have to see the place that represents the beginning of their downfall. As Uncle Jake said, sometimes karma has a sense of humor. Yesterday, I received an anonymous letter from someone in their social circle. Apparently, my mother spends most days at home, rarely going out except for necessities. My father has been seen sitting alone at a local coffee shop staring into space for hours. Their once busy social calendar is completely empty. As I prepare to start my MBA program, I can't help but reflect on my grandmother's words. Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. She was right. And now, thanks to her foresight and Uncle Jake's help, I've not only protected my education fund, but also taught my parents a lesson they'll never forget. That's the end of this story. Thank you all for your support through this journey. While I never wanted things to end this way, I'm at peace knowing that justice has been served. Story 2. When my mother, 75, died of an unexpected stroke last year, I, 45F, inherited the house I grew up in. My profession as a financial consultant has been developed over almost 20 years, and losing my mother was heartbreaking. I have been able to stay stable throughout this trying period because to her meticulous planning. When I was 7, my parents were divorced. Even though they shared custody, my mother and I were always closer. I never felt like a priority to my 73-year-old father, who was either preoccupied with business or dating. Since she had sacrificed her promising real estate profession to raise me while assisting Dad with his corporate finance and career advancement, Mom acquired ownership of the property after the divorce in lieu of alimony. It has always been more than simply a place to live at this large colonial-style home in the Massachusetts suburbs. From the kitchen, where she taught me how to make her famous apple pie, to the garden, where we spent many weekends growing her favorite flowers, every nook and cranny evokes memories of Mom. Since my parents purchased it in the late 1970s, the house, a clean 4-bedroom building with a wraparound porch, has served as our family's residence. As a child, I saw my mother make this house a cozy and inviting place. Even following the divorce, she managed to retain an amazing house while re-entering the real estate market. For me, as Dad's business career took off, his visits grew more and more infrequent. He would attend important occasions like birthdays and graduations. However, our bond never grew to the degree I observed in my peers' bonds with their dads. The terms of the divorce settlement had been simple. Dad was relieved of alimony payments, and Mom received the house. She had taken care of everything at home as he ascended the corporate ladder, supporting him during his early career. Instead of looking for continued support after their divorce, she insisted on keeping the house. Monthly payments are not as important as a home, she always said, and it turned out to be a smart move. She made sure I had a secure home life while she reconstructed her real estate business. My father invited his 61-year-old lover, Elizabeth, to our Christmas party 2 years ago. From a past relationship with her high school lover, she brought her 2 kids, 41 F 39F. As their mother seemed to be, the girls, Sarah and Rachel, were quiet and reserved. Initially, Elizabeth complimented Mom's decorating style and asked insightful questions about our family's customs, demonstrating her sincere enthusiasm in getting to know us. Over the next few months, we gradually but favorably became closer to Elizabeth and her kids. She was considerate of our tastes by calling ahead to ask if she might bring anything unique to our sporadic family gatherings. Despite their lack of warmth, her girls were always courteous and appeared to value being a part of our family get-togethers. Despite Elizabeth's presence in our life, Mom remained incredibly kind. Everybody has the right to happiness. When Dad and Elizabeth would go out, I occasionally noticed a glint of grief in her eyes as she spoke. In retrospect, I see how strong she must have been to greet them with such warmth. The loss was abrupt and terrible when Mom died last spring. She had a stroke while she was asleep. Peaceful, but much too early, the doctor added. She was planning to remodel the garden that weekend, and we had just spoken about it over dinner the previous evening. I was shocked by how suddenly she went, but she was realistic and had planned for everything. When the will was being read, around the time I turned 18, we learned that my mother had revised her inheritance arrangement. I was left the house and most of her possessions. She had even left a note outlining her choices, especially with regard to the house. Through all the storms, this house has been your bulwark. Keep it as a safe haven, but don't allow it stop you from pursuing your goals. When the funeral preparations were being made, Dad and Elizabeth provided the proper support. Her kids helped organize Mom's enormous picture albums for the memorial exhibit, while Elizabeth helped organize the wake's cuisine. After the well reading, though, I noticed a change in Dad's attitude. His congrats on my inheritance looked forced, and he made many remarks about how he and Mom had picked the house together, and how he had managed all the significant renovations over the years. The weeks that followed the funeral were filled with paperwork and last-minute changes. In addition to the items he had given Mom throughout the years, Dad was given her wedding jewels, things she had reserved just for him. I assumed he would find meaning in this gesture, but he appeared more preoccupied with the home. He casually mentioned how the area had improved and how the home value had gone up. We appreciate his foresight in selecting this site. I stayed in the house and took solace in following my mother's routine. Even though I was never as good with roses as she was, her garden became my weekend job. In an attempt to create a new normal for myself, I turned one of the spare bedrooms into a home office because my job as a financial advisor permitted me to work from home to some extent. Dad called to tell Elizabeth that he was engaged around 6 months ago. In order to save money on hotel expenses, he proposed that they spend the weeks before the wedding at my place. There was plenty of space in the house, and Elizabeth's daughters were working from home. He made it look like a win-win scenario by offering to divide the household expenditures and utilities. A month ago, the arrangement began, and at first, it seemed like a good development. Conversations over coffee in the morning and family dinners in the evening filled the house. Elizabeth demonstrated her culinary prowess by frequently cooking for everyone. Even though they were still reticent, her girls appeared to be coming around to the notion of our blended family. The home started to seem less empty than it had after Mom's death. Dad then requested a private meeting in Mom's garden 3 days prior to the wedding. It was her favorite place. He disclosed that the wedding was not the only reason for their return. He desired for them to become permanent residents. He pretended that he was worried about my welfare and that I was living alone in such a big mansion. He said that your mother would have preferred for you to be surrounded by relatives, but I couldn't help but question whether she would have agreed. The request evoked complex emotions. I kind of missed the family dynamic I've been living with for the last month. The presence of people made the place feel cozier, and Elizabeth had been really gracious. However, there was something strange about Dad's strategy. I couldn't help but think about his past responses to the bequest and his casual remarks on the property's worth. I told him I wanted time to consider my options and would make a decision after the wedding, rather than responding right away. It was telling how he responded to this simple request. Before he could conceal it with comprehension, a glimmer of irritation appeared on his face. It brought back memories of my early years when his intentions and my needs had clashed. Now that the wedding is only a few days away, I'm at a turning point. Following the ceremony, they are expected to remain here for a few more days before returning to Houston. Their plea to make this arrangement permanent has been one that I've been leaning toward. We have demonstrated over the past month that we can live in harmony with one another, and having other people around makes the home feel less empty. But I can't get rid of the persistent sense that something is off. Warning signs include Dad's obsession with the house's worth, his subtly expressed irritation at my hesitancy, and his attempts to remind me of his role in its acquisition. Elizabeth has been flawless, nearly flawless, and I question whether their goal extends beyond fostering familial ties. A part of me regrets questioning their motives. This is what healed families do, after all. Join forces, help one another, and use the fragments of what was shattered to create something new. However, there is another part of me that cautions me, maybe the one that acquired my mother's pragmatic character. I have dedicated my professional life to assisting people in making wise financial choices. However, this circumstance has made me doubt my judgment. My normally clear thinking seems to be obscured by the emotional complexities of family connections. I would definitely benefit from an independent opinion on whether my suspicions are justified or whether my gut is attempting to keep me from making a grave error. Does sharing your inherited house with family cause you to feel thus conflicted? Should I believe my instincts when I sense something is off? Or am I allowing disappointments from the past to skew how I perceive the current circumstance? Update 1. Following my last post, things rapidly got out of hand. The wedding took place at the Grand Hotel downtown this past weekend. I said a courteous toast and assisted with the preparations, in spite of my misgivings. The morning following the wedding, everything appeared picture perfect, and Elizabeth's kids were bridesmaids. At about 8 a.m., I woke up to a strangely silent home. After the festivities, I initially believed that everyone was sleeping in, but there was a hurriedly scrawled letter on the kitchen counter when I went downstairs to make coffee. We went on our honeymoon. Return in a week. They had not informed me of their departure. During the wedding preparations, their plans were not mentioned. The time of their departure was not discussed. Nothing. They were gone, yet their personal effects were still strewn throughout the guest rooms. Both Elizabeth and my father's phone calls ended up in voicemail. Elizabeth finally picked up her phone around midday. Her customary charming manner was entirely absent from her tone. "Did we neglect to let you know?" "I apologize for that," she added, clearly not being sincere. She became irate when I voiced my worries about not being told. "You are no longer a child. We wanted some time to ourselves because your father has a new family now." From there, the discussion deteriorated. She even dared to advise me to get over myself and tidy the home before they came back. Then she said that when they returned, they intended to remodel their bedroom. At that moment, something inside of me exploded. I took pictures and videos of everything throughout the course of the following several hours. The message they left, the condition of the house, and their possessions. I then had all the locks replaced after contacting a locksmith. Along with the paperwork, I packed up their possessions and put them all in waterproof containers on the covered porch. I sent a message to Elizabeth and to my father. "Your things are on the porch, packed. You may pick them up on Sunday. The remainder will be given to a charitable organization. Never try to enter the home. I've changed the locks, and if I need to, I'll call the cops." The reactions were explosive and happened instantly. Messages from both of them began to flood my phone, alternating between guilt-tripping and other things. "How could you harm threats and family like this? You'll be sorry you made this choice." Messages about my destroying the family were also sent by Elizabeth's daughters. My father's voicemail was what really got to me. "Your actions would embarrass your mother. We were attempting to assist you, and you return our favor in this way." Conveniently, he forgot that he had been coveting the house ever since his mother died. All of their voicemails and messages are still there, but I've banned their phones for the time being. I also told my neighbors about the incident and put in security cameras. Some of them recall how Dad promised to watch the home while I'm at work and treated Mom during the divorce. They still haven't retrieved their possessions after 3 days. Everything is going well on the porch because of the nice weather, but I'm growing more and more annoyed with their games. A lawyer I spoke with affirmed that I had the right to have their possessions taken away because I had given them adequate notice. Their use of social media, while disregarding my instructions about gathering their belongings, has been the most illuminating aspect of the entire situation. With messages about fresh starts and family harmony, they have been sharing countless honeymoon pictures online. Elizabeth even had the audacity to post about toxic individuals who are incapable of handling the joy of others. In retrospect, I see how flawless their family performance was. Only they have the ability to behave in such a way, changing from kind and considerate to arrogant and violent. Their true personality is revealed when things don't go their way. I'm glad I followed my gut and refused to accept their long-term living arrangement before visiting them. Even though I now know it wasn't true, I still miss the sense of family we had while they were here. True colors show not in good times, but in how people handle disappointment, Mom used to say. I learned everything I needed to know about their character from their response when they were told no. Has anybody handled comparable familial circumstances? How did you respond to the fallout? I'm sticking to my guns, but I could need some guidance on how to handle the flying monkeys they're sending my way. Post 2. The true narrative has finally surfaced, 2 weeks after my last post. Their urgent attempts to move in are explained by what I found. It's worse than I thought, too. My father's old co-worker, who has been a family friend for 30 years, contacted me yesterday. My father claimed to have been fired 3 months prior for mishandling business cash, so she disclosed that he wasn't taking a vacation. It seems that he had been making dangerous financial choices without the required approval, which resulted in large losses. The reality of their financial circumstances is startling. He used all of his retirement funds to cover the $45,000 cost of the wedding at the Grand Hotel. They spent an additional $30,000 on their 2-week Maldivian honeymoon, which was paid for by selling his investment holdings. When they got engaged last year, Elizabeth quit her job as a real estate agent. She was confident in my father's 6-figure salary and their intention to move into what their friends called their future family home. Yes, they did say that about my house. They had planned their entire budget under the presumption that I would allow them to live with me permanently. They had already started selling some of their furniture and given notice of their move to Houston. Their possessions are still on my porch, which explains why. There is literally nowhere else for them to go. I've discovered through mutual acquaintances that they had been spreading the myth that my mother's misplaced sympathy was the reason I was temporarily residing in their home. They gave the impression that they were being giving by letting me stay while I recovered. In actuality, the house is legally mine, and I earn a 6-figure salary as a successful financial consultant. More unsettling information was revealed by my father's former co-workers. Bad investments weren't the only reason he was fired. At work, he had been acting more and more erratically, becoming defensive and making lofty promises to clients. When questioned about his strategies, some suspect he was trying to recover from personal investment losses, though nobody knows for sure. Elizabeth's behavior makes perfect sense now. Her perfect homemaker act was a calculated move. She had been telling her social circle that living in my house would allow her to focus on creating a proper family environment instead of working. She had even started planning renovations to my mother's garden, showing her friends Pinterest boards of her intended changes. Their honeymoon photos on social media tell a different story. Now, every magical moment they shared was funded by my father's depleted retirement account. Their posts about new beginnings were literally banking on taking over my home. When they returned from their honeymoon to find their belongings still on the porch, they tried a different approach. Elizabeth called with a tearful apology, claiming she had been overwhelmed by wedding stress. My father attempted to paint a picture of family unity, suggesting we could help each other through difficult times. During this conversation, they inadvertently revealed more of their plan. They weren't just looking to move in temporarily, they expected me to transfer ownership of the house to them eventually. Their exact words were combining our family resources for everyone's benefit, which apparently meant I would sign over my inheritance to them. I've subsequently heard they had previously contacted a real estate agent about the house's prospective worth and had explored financing alternatives for when they owned it. They had even contacted a contractor about future upgrades, presenting themselves as the owners who are graciously letting their daughter stay for now. My lawyer has recommended me to submit a legal stop and desist letter addressing their misrepresenting of the house's ownership. We're also documenting all their social media postings and interactions for eventual legal action if needed. Several neighbors have come forward with reports of Elizabeth surveying the garden and discussing her remodeling ideas while I was at work. One even indicated that she had brought potential contractors to examine the property without my knowledge. The complete picture of their financial desperation is now visible. All of my father's severance payout went into wedding preparations. His retirement assets were fully exhausted by the wedding and honeymoon costs. They have no home in Houston anymore, having served notice on their flat, and Elizabeth has broken bridges with her old workplace by resigning unexpectedly. Their present liquid assets wouldn't support more than a few months of living expenditures. They're now sleeping at a modest motel while attempting to figure out their next step. Elizabeth's social media has gone quiet, except for cryptic remarks about family, treachery, and hidden benefits. My father has gone from harsh demands to desperate appeals, but I'm remaining firm. Some relatives say that since he is still my father, I ought to assist them in getting out of this situation. However, as a financial advisor, I am aware that permitting bad financial choices just causes additional issues. Furthermore, their attempt to use coercion to get me to leave my house reveals their actual motivations. Although I'm hoping that legal action won't be required, I'm working closely with my lawyer to document everything. Next week, I will begin treatment to handle the improvement to the house's security system. I don't miss the irony. Due to bad financial choices, my father, who worked in finance for a living, has ruined his retirement. But with meticulous preparation, I, the daughter Dad never had time for, have established a secure existence. Even though she would be disappointed to see him fall this far, Mom would embrace the poetic justice. Has anyone else found relatives who have committed similar financial frauds? How did you manage to keep your distance while dealing with the betrayal? The rage is no longer the difficult thing. It's the melancholy of understanding that my father hasn't truly changed. He still prioritizes his personal wants above everything others. It is only recently that he has included others in his ideas. I appreciate all of the help that this community has given me. I was able to stand by my judgments and follow my gut thanks to your advice. I'm concentrating on safeguarding my house and myself as I try to come to terms with this treachery. I'll provide another report when there are noteworthy developments. Update 3. This scenario has finally come to an end after weeks of turmoil, and the finale is nearly poetic. Elizabeth's ex unexpectedly stepped in and helped my father and Elizabeth leave town today. Not because they wanted to. They were sleeping at a cheap motel when we last left off, running out of money and alternatives. I kept recording their actions, including their attempts to disseminate false information about me throughout the neighborhood. I was unaware that Elizabeth's girls had contacted their father to inform him of the terrible predicament their mother had found herself in. Michael, their father, is reportedly a prosperous Houston businessman. Over the years, he remained friendly with Elizabeth, focusing mostly on their daughter's welfare. He made the decision to step in when he found out that Elizabeth was unemployed, practically homeless, and involved in a plot to take over my house. This developed in a very amazing way. Michael sent me an unexpected email last Tuesday. He said he was sorry to speak with me personally, but he needed to double-check certain information. What their girls had told him was very different from what Elizabeth had told him. He was horrified by his ex's actions after our talk. Later, I found out that Michael had been becoming increasingly concerned as he watched Elizabeth's increasingly frantic social media messages. The last straw for him was learning that she had been applying for short-term loans under their daughter's name, which would have affected their credit ratings. There was a masterclass on problem-solving that followed. Under severe terms, Michael volunteered to pay for their return to Houston. He made sure Elizabeth could resume her profession by setting her up for interviews with a number of real estate companies with which he had relationships. But in exchange for these chances, she had to witness every effort to seize my belongings. The best thing was seeing their meticulously crafted facade fall apart. Their social circle was informed by Michael that the story about them owning my property was a pure fabrication. He even went so far as to make a kind yet strong response to Elizabeth's statements about their family home on social media. In a rare moment of candor, my father, who had been humiliated by the revelation of his financial mismanagement, broke the facade during a phone call that I had secretly taped. He acknowledged that their joint goal to buy my house had served as some of the driving force for the entire marriage. Elizabeth had convinced him that they could work together to coerce me into selling it to them or sharing ownership. Elizabeth's daughters, who felt bad about playing a passive part in the plot, exposed the scope of their preparation. They posted screenshots of group chats in which my father and Elizabeth spoke about different ways to control me. Among these were Elizabeth's conscious attempt to be the ideal stepmother and their strategic choice to make their marriage announcement right when they knew I was most lonely. In addition to financial assistance, Michael's intervention included accountability. He offered to pay for their first month's rent and relocation costs in Houston. but only after they agreed to stop communicating with me unless I asked them to, and signed legal papers admitting they had no claim to my property. Their departure was revealing. Instead of offering an apology, they utterly ignored their botched attempt to seize my property and sent out a mass email to friends and relatives saying they were going back to Houston for exciting new prospects. Elizabeth even dared to share pictures of them departing with sayings about ending chapters and starting over, tagged with hashtags related to luxurious living, as if this wasn't a shameful retreat. Yesterday, my security cameras caught them making a final drive by my house. They didn't stop, but they did slow down for a moment. Their possessions were already en route to Houston, after being transferred to a storage facility at Michael's cost. It has been remarkably quiet since. My neighbors have been tremendously supportive as they have seen this drama play out. I became aware of how often these circumstances are after hearing several people relate their personal tales of family property conflicts. Several individuals have apologized for believing Elizabeth's allegations, and the local community, which she attempted to infiltrate, has come together in support of me. A support group for those coping with familial alienation is what I've begun going to. It's assisting me in processing the situation's nuanced feelings. The comfort of not having to deal with their manipulation, the fury at their effort at deceit, and the lingering pain of losing the little contact I had with my father. Now the house feels different. Calm, but not deserted. I've begun remodeling in an effort to make new memories rather than destroy old ones. I joined a local gardening club to learn how to properly care for Mom's treasured roses, and now her garden is flowering once again. Working in the same area where she experienced such delight is helpful. In fact, this experience has helped my career. I now have a very intimate understanding of how family dynamics may affect financial decisions because I work as a financial counselor. Although I don't share my own narrative, I'm more suited to guide customers through comparable circumstances. I don't miss the irony of having to deal with a financially reckless father while working as a financial advisor. Mom was correct when she declared that education was the finest investment. I was able to see the warning signs in their conduct early on thanks to my professional experience. Regarding the future, I'm concentrating on establishing wholesome connections. My friends that supported me during this time have grown to be like family. Even the person I'm seeing is surprisingly more interested in my business than my property. I've learned from this experience that family isn't about having the same legal title or DNA. It's about sincere concern for one another's welfare, honesty, and respect. My mother was aware of this, which is why she took such care to safeguard my inheritance from people who followed my narrative and gave me guidance. Thank you. Your encouragement kept me going when I started to doubt myself. To those in like circumstances, follow your gut. Keep a record of everything, and resist the urge to compromise your limits out of shame. Unless anything important occurs, I don't anticipate posting any further updates. Now living in Houston, my father and Elizabeth are beginning a new life without access to my house or money. Every now and then, Michael updates me, mostly to make sure they're honoring their commitment to keep away. Mom would be pleased with the way I handled this. Not because I was tough, but rather because I upheld my morals and preserved the heritage she had fought so hard to leave me. That's the most important thing, in the end. Story 3. I recently received an invitation to my 38-year-old estranged older sister Nicole's wedding. We've never really gotten along, so I wasn't anticipating an invitation at all, so this was unexpected. But now that she's invited me, I'm not sure if I want to go or not. Considering our complex past and our long-standing distance from one another, the problem between us began when we were both still children, you see. At 35, I was always the sick kid, the one who needed a lot of medical attention and had terrible asthma all the time. From the ages of 7 to 12, I spent a large portion of my youth in and out of Boston hospitals, receiving various treatments that frequently prevented me from playing outside with friends due to my health problems. Naturally, I spent a lot of time with my parents, who frequently stayed up with me during long, stressful hospital stays when I was having regular, unpredictable asthma episodes. They must have been prepared to take me to the emergency room. Anytime, anywhere. Despite having insurance, my parents were struggling to keep up with the growing medical expenditures. All of this was really challenging for Nicole. She frequently had to stay with our grandparents, who lived in Connecticut about an hour away, while I was in the hospital. She must have been lonely, but they were gracious enough to take her in. Nicole believed that I was to blame for all of the lost time and the many evenings spent apart from our parents. Apparently, it was because of me. Her early years were spent waiting and observing from the sidelines while our parents gave their all to take care of me. Nicole consequently developed a deep-seated animosity toward me and expressed it throughout my life. She carried a persistent resentment, feeling that I had denied her the affection and intimacy she desired from her parents. But in reality, all of this was in her imagination. My parents loved Nicole as much as they loved me. Despite the fact that you may think I'm being cold or cruel by writing this, no one was given preference. They wasted no time in bringing our family back together as soon as my health improved and I was able to go home. After they returned Nicole from our grandparents' house, they made every effort to compensate for the months she had been gone. They were going to make sure she knew how much she meant to them. She was able to enjoy herself with them on special excursions to Disney World. Every year they planned lavish birthday celebrations for her, going above and above to honor her and make her feel unique. Every weekend, they were always there to support her during her basketball games. They went above and above to restore the intimacy that may have felt lost during my hospital stays by spending time with my sister whenever they could. Nicole, however, never witnessed any of their efforts. She was too obstinate and unable to let go of the sense of desertion she had experienced during the months she was separated from us. She felt lonely throughout that period, and nothing our parents did could make it go away. She would repeatedly bring up this subject during our family conversations as her resentment grew. She would sort of use it as her trump card whenever she could to win every fight, and use it as a means of obtaining what she wanted, or simply to make her parents feel bad. She never gave us the opportunity to go forward completely, which was a recurring theme with her. I tolerated Nicole's behavior for years, allowing her to utilize that old grudge against me to obtain what she wanted whenever it was convenient for her. Every time she tried to quarrel with me or start a fight, I would simply remain silent. However, something changed in me once I grew up and moved to UMass Amherst for college. Distance gave me a new perspective, and I came to the conclusion that Nicole wasn't actually a good sister to me. She rarely inquired about my feelings, and everything was all about her. This insight made it harder for me to put up with Nicole's incessant whining. Every time she tried to bring up that old, weary subject of how she felt abandoned as a child, and how our parents purportedly loved me more during my college breaks, I would dispute back with her and tell her to stop talking and go away. She would scream at me more as a result. God, it seemed as though she was constantly bringing up the subject. I had run out of pity to offer. It all came to a head on my 21st birthday. To commemorate this milestone, my parents invited close family and friends to a lavish and lovely celebration for me. The evening was full of joy, laughing, and everyone I cared about. Naturally, Nicole was present, but instead of taking part in the celebrations, she spent the evening getting more and more inebriated and complaining to anybody who would listen. She endlessly talked about how I was the lucky kid, how our parents had always given me preference when we were growing up, and how she had never had the same level of affection or care. She implied that my parents had somehow let her down throughout the years when she even mentioned that she wished she had a birthday celebration like this one. This was not accurate at all. A few months prior, Nicole had celebrated her own 21st birthday by traveling to Cancun with her boyfriend in style. Our parents had paid for the entire vacation since she had practically made them. However, she hadn't had a good trip. She regretted bringing her partner along when they broke up shortly after. But instead of spending her special day at home with her loved ones, she chose to spend it in the tropical paradise. It was obvious that she was still disappointed by her separation, and it seemed like she had turned all of her anger at me. I had always wanted to celebrate my 21st birthday with family, surrounded by people who truly cared about me, as is customary for me. Knowing how much this meant to me, my parents gladly consented to throw a large party and went out of their way to make it special. Nicole, however, seemed to dislike my decision rather than accept it, as if my need for family time was just another way of saying no. They were favoring me over her. She refused to accept the choices she had made that led to her own misery, as though she couldn't see past her own pain. I gave Nicole a slice of the cake after I had sliced it and started distributing the pieces to everyone. She joked that she had been handed the smallest slice of cake because she was clearly the least favorite member of the family, but she quickly made a snarky remark after taking her piece. I experienced a sharp increase in annoyance. Once again, she was interjecting that well-known grievance into what should have been a happy occasion. At last, I'd had enough. I rolled my eyes and said, "Can you just stop making these comments?" with barely concealed annoyance. "Nobody is the least preferred. You're only thinking about it." I touched a nerve with my remark. Nicole snapped right away, arguing that I was overreacting to her innocuous joke and that she had only been kidding. However, I bluntly informed her that no one found her remarks humorous. They weren't needed at all. They were just exhausted. She gave me an irritated look, but I just turned to leave. Throughout the evening, I made an effort to interact with the other guests in the hopes of preserving what remained of the party without any further drama. After the party was over and most of the guests had gone, Nicole, who was obviously furious, cornered my dad and me. For what she described as a lighthearted joke, she accused me of attempting to make her feel awful. She said that rather than taking things so personally, I might have simply ignored it, like I typically do. By then, I was tired of the whole affair and decided it wasn't worth the effort, so I just tried to ignore her. However, my parents made an effort to speak with her and share their feelings. It upset them to hear her constantly accuse them of favoritism, and she brought up this issue a bit too frequently. She was reminded that they had always tried their hardest to treat us fairly and make sure we both felt appreciated and cherished. Nicole became agitated once more over this. She began her well-known tirade, claiming that our parents had abandoned her throughout the period I was ill, leaving her feeling alone and abandoned. Despite their frustration, my parents tried to calm her down by reminding her of the circumstances of the day. They reiterated that they had left her in the capable hands of our grandparents, two devoted individuals who had always made an effort to make her feel welcome. They mentioned that they had made every effort to see her, balancing their time between being with me in the hospital and making sure she was taken care of. Nicole, however, was unwilling to listen. She was enmeshed in her story, certain that her experience was one of abandonment and rejection, despite the fact that the reality was far more nuanced. The scenario was clear-cut, and no amount of explanation or assurance appeared to be sufficient to dispel her conviction. I simply gave a headshake. Tired of listening to the same arguments repeated over and over, Nicole became irate when she saw my cold demeanor and demanded to know why I hadn't even made an effort to apologize for embarrassing her earlier, and if I even cared about her feelings. Her charge seemed ridiculous. I told her I had nothing to apologize for as I gave her a frustrated look. She had acted foolishly and clung to this insatiable need to play the victim, embarrassing herself in the process. By this point, everyone had grown accustomed to her act, and to be honest, it was no longer effective. Nicole's face flushed, her eyes filled with hurt and rage as she yelled, "I wish you died," indicating that my words had a profound effect on her. Rather than undergoing those operations, perhaps then my parents wouldn't have had to leave me and spend so much time with you in the hospital. Everyone was silenced by her words, which were like a kick to the gut. My parents gave her a horrified look. The first person to reply was my dad. He informed Nicole that she had gone too far in a firm but restrained tone. Before she said anything else she would regret, he told her to stop. Nicole, who appeared embarrassed and shaken by the confrontation, stood there for a moment, stunned by the weight of her own words, and then abruptly left. Even after the dust settled, Nicole never apologized to me for what she had said that night, and I started to slowly realize that she had actually meant those harsh words for me as a result. In the years that followed, I found myself distancing myself from her, unable to forgive or forget. Our parents made multiple attempts to mend things, trying to repair the fractured bond between us, but nothing seemed to work. I kept my guard up, and Nicole never showed any real effort to bridge the gap either. We have been estranged ever since. That's how things had always been between us. Until this year. I recently heard about Nicole's engagement through our parents. They seemed really happy for her, and were hoping that I could reach out to congratulate her on this happy news. But I never did. After all, we hadn't been close in years, and I felt no inclination to step in. Then, unexpectedly, Nicole reached out to me herself. She told me she wanted to reconnect and asked if I could meet her for lunch so that we could talk. Although I was surprised, I firmly declined and told her that I wasn't interested. Shortly after, she went to our parents, asking them to pressure me into meeting her. When my parents urged me to agree to see her, I still said no. I just couldn't understand why she wanted to meet up with me all of a sudden, and had no desire to walk into what felt like an emotional ambush, not to be deterred. My parents eventually found a way to set up a meeting. They invited me to lunch without mentioning that Nicole would be there too. When I arrived at the local Olive Garden and saw her sitting at the table, I was annoyed and felt cornered, but I stayed mostly out of respect for my parents, who urged us to talk and work things out, though I was frustrated. I realized there was no easy way out of the situation, so I finally decided to see what Nicole had to say. It was then that Nicole finally apologized to me, after all those years. She spoke earnestly, admitting how much she had missed me over the years. Though I was initially icy and skeptical, her apology felt genuine. She said that she wanted to rebuild our relationship, saying that she was now satisfied with her boyfriend and felt completely secure with him. She continued to tell me that she didn't want me absent on what she hoped would be the finest day of her life. Nicole informed me how much it would mean to her if I attended her wedding, which is happening in a few months from now, and met with her boyfriend and his family. I was a bit apprehensive, so I told her I would need some time to think about it, since I hadn't expected any of this. The apology, the offer, the sudden wish to include me. It has all been a lot to process, so I left her with that, unsure of what I truly wanted to do, and wanting time to decide if I could set aside the past to be there for her. Since that lunch, my parents have been reaching out to me practically non-stop, pressing me to attend Nicole's wedding, and insisting that she has changed. They believe that she deserves a second opportunity, and that it's time to put the past behind us. They tell me that keeping on to this hatred towards my sister is just harming me, and that accepting her apologies would be a sign of maturity and forgiveness. They've even implied that my inability to move on is inflicting extra pressure on the family, stating that I'm being stubborn, even cruel, for not accepting her apologies. But for me, it's not that straightforward. Years of tension and unresolved hurt don't suddenly dissipate because of one apology. I can't just delete the things Nicole has said and done, nor can I forget the years she treated me like a rival. It has nothing to do with being cruel. It's about shielding myself from a pattern that has previously caused me pain. I understand my parents' desire for us to get back together, but I can't deny that their push comes across as more guilt than support. They appear to be so focused on maintaining family unity that they are ignoring the truth. We succeeded. Now that I have a wedding invitation on my kitchen counter, my 36-year-old partner James is advising me to follow my gut. I'm not sure if I'm ready, or if I can believe that Nicole's transformation is genuinely permanent, even though I know forgiving is crucial. Is it unreasonable of me to turn down my sister's invitation to her wedding? Update 1. I appreciate all of your suggestions. I've thought a lot about it after reading through all of the comments over the last 2 weeks. My parents are ecstatic to hear that I have finally consented to go to my sister Nicole's wedding. For me and the family dynamics that have been so tense throughout my recent checkup at Massachusetts General, this feels like a big stride. I was pleasantly surprised to learn that I was pregnant. Both James and I are astonished, but overjoyed. We're welcoming this new phase of our lives, even though it wasn't precisely anticipated at age 35. According to the doctor, everything appears to be in good health thus far. We agreed to inform my parents about the pregnancy prior to Nicole's wedding. After talking with James, they were overjoyed. Their first grandchild will be this one. But given Nicole's history of erratic reactions, the dilemma of how to tell her hung over us. Given that her wedding was coming up, I was worried about her reaction. My parents thought it might be best to deliver the news to her, so they offered to do so. Instead of finding out at her wedding, they said it would be better to hear about my pregnancy in a controlled setting. I consented mostly to prevent any possible drama on her special day. Nobody anticipated Nicole's reaction. My parents claimed that her initial response was suspicion rather than congratulations. She asked if I was indeed pregnant, or if this was just a show to get attention. Nicole fell strangely silent when my mother handed her the ultrasound picture. I gave Nicole a call and offered to skip her wedding if she felt uncomfortable because I was pregnant. I was still very much invited, she insisted, dismissing the suggestion. Her tone sounded strange, but I decided to assume she was attempting to be encouraging. James is supporting me by accompanying me to the wedding, and I appreciate his being there. During all of this, especially the pregnancy, he has been my pillar of support. Pregnancy and the impending wedding have both presented difficult emotional challenges. This weekend is the wedding, and I'm still feeling uneasy. Although it's still very slight, my baby bump is beginning to show. I have selected a dress that fits loosely and is suitable for a wedding while also being comfy for my condition. I'm constantly reminded by James that if I feel uncomfortable, I can leave at any moment. I'm making an effort to remain optimistic and hold out hope that my relationship with Nicole may take a new turn with this wedding. Perhaps being an aunt would change her perspective, but I still can't get rid of this persistent worry at the back of my mind. I'm writing this from my hospital bed because the wedding update was a complete fiasco. What should have been a day of joy instead became my greatest nightmare. I noticed Nicole looking at my noticeable pregnant belly several times during the ceremony, her face becoming more tense at the reception. I received discreet congratulations from a few family members, just a brief embrace. Nothing that would draw the bride's attention away. Nicole's approach to my table, utterly disregarding my compliments, was the tipping point. Looking me up and down, she asked doubtfully if I was faking my pregnancy or if it was real. She sneered and muttered that this was just so stereotypical of me when I showed her my prenatal pictures as evidence. She lost it and accused me of arranging my pregnancy to interfere with her wedding. She told me that she had wanted to marry, first to show me that she had finally won in life, but she was unable to do so because I would be the one to give our parents their first grandchild. I turned to go and found James, fed up. At that moment, I felt Nicole's hands give me a forceful push from behind. I stumbled forward, reflexively shielding my stomach as I hit the floor. My wrist and shoulder ached sharply from the hit. I was barely standing when James and my dad hurried to help me up. Nicole continued to shout at me for spoiling her day. As I laid there, I was afraid for the safety of my infant. James called the police when someone called for an ambulance. Nicole was arrested during her own wedding celebration when the police showed up. I'm currently in the hospital with bruises, a sprained shoulder, and a shattered wrist. The doctors have reassured me that my baby is doing okay after monitoring him for the entire night. James and my parents are still with me. We've made the decision to seek a restraining order against Nicole after talking it over with James. We want to make sure she is held accountable and doesn't do anything similar ever again. I only want to concentrate on protecting my child and getting over this horrific event. Third update. Last week, Nicole's ex-fiancé Michael contacted me to ask if we could get coffee. James urged me to listen to him despite my reluctance, stating that it might bring some closure. Michael apologized right away for Nicole's behavior at the wedding when we first met at a peaceful cafe. He appeared astonished and tired, evidently still taking in all that had transpired. He inquired about our past while we were speaking. He was interested in the whole picture of my connection with Nicole. As I described our early years, the years of bitterness, and the different events, his face was growing incredulous, and I could see it. As it happens, Nicole gave him an entirely different account of our situation. In her story, I was the cunning sister who had purposefully ruined her life by stealing her attention and destroying her joy. Her point of view, which portrayed me as the bad guy, was all he had ever heard. Michael disclosed that he had left their shared residence as soon as the wedding incident occurred. Someone who would physically abuse their pregnant sister was someone he couldn't reconcile with the woman he believed he was marrying. He was especially troubled by her later lack of regret. He revealed troubling information regarding Nicole's actions during their romance. Her dramatic responses when things didn't go her way, her incessant demand for attention, and her propensity to reinterpret events and portray herself as the victim. Previously, he had linked these characteristics to traumatic experiences in his family. Michael, who believes Nicole's account of events, said he is currently working to get their marriage dissolved. Nicole pushing me wasn't the only thing that happened at the wedding. He was now able to see her true self. He apologized for not recognizing the indications sooner and thanked me for being honest. I feel more at ease about my choice to seek the restraining order now that I've met with Michael. Nicole's problems are obviously more serious than I thought, and keeping my distance is the best course of action for both my unborn child and me. For everyone who has been curious about my family's response, I can say that they have been totally supportive during these trying weeks. At first, though, my parents pushed for reconciliation. Everything was altered by the wedding incident. Following the conclusion of the court procedures, Nicole was sentenced to 1 year in prison for assaulting a pregnant woman. A restraining order has also been issued to prevent her from approaching me or my unborn kid. My sense of relief from this decision has been immense. Within the weeks leading up to sentencing, through friends and family, Nicole repeatedly tried to get in touch with me and wrote emails pleading with me to take back my comments. She tried to talk to me, but I ignored her. She made one final attempt to persuade our parents to step in. However, my mother's reaction was different this time. Given that Nicole was the true issue, Mom firmly informed Nicole that she and Dad had given up on attempting to mend our relationship. She informed Nicole that no one wanted to be involved in her life any longer until she could actually change. Nicole's reaction was expected. In an attempt to employ her old strategies of guilt, she yelled at her mother. Mom, however, was no longer sympathetic. All she did was block Nicole's phone and end the call. I had never witnessed my mother adopt such a strong position before. My case was given careful consideration by the prosecutor. Considering the public nature of the assault and my pregnancy, a number of visitors came forward as witnesses, and the security film offered unmistakable proof. Nicole made one more attempt to portray herself as the victim at sentence, saying she had simply lost control for a brief minute. However, the judge showed no pity. Now that the court case is done, I can concentrate fully on my pregnancy. I've started going to prenatal courses with James, and the doctors say everything is going according to plan. It feels great to focus on becoming a mother after all the drama and worry. My parents have been really helpful, taking me to doctor's visits and helping us set up the nursery. Even though it's unfortunate that my sister's situation had to finish this way, I know I made the right decision for the security and welfare of my family. Update 5. James and I are officially exhausted but ecstatic parents now that our baby has finally arrived. Diaper changes and feeding sessions have kept the sleepless nights hectic, but we're savoring every second of it. Even though James must work during the day, he has been fantastic, taking night shifts whenever possible. My folks have been quite helpful and frequently visit to lend a hand. When I was a baby, Mom would bring home-cooked meals and teach me tiny things. The delivery proceeded without a hitch, but Dad gets upset every time our child clings to his finger. But intense? James supported me during the entire labor process, and the room was ecstatic when our baby was eventually born. As my parents eagerly waited at the hospital, they couldn't contain their joy at meeting their first grandchild, and the staff kept remarking on how healthy our little one is. Thinking back on everything that transpired throughout my pregnancy, the wedding event, the court case, Nicole's sentencing, is unreal. However, concentrating on our unborn child has provided us great calm. As we negotiate early motherhood, I feel more secure knowing that Nicole is still incarcerated and that the restraining order is still in effect. James proposed that we relocate to a different area, merely to be safe for Nicole's future release. But we're thinking about it. We'll have to make that decision later. We are currently just savoring these priceless initial weeks with our child. My favorite room in the house is now the nursery. Occasionally, while I hold our sleeping infant in the rocking chair, I am overcome with gratitude for the way things worked out. We have produced something lovely and pure, in spite of all the craziness that preceded it. Our child is soundly resting next to me as I write this last update. I'm happier than I've ever been, even if I'm exhausted. The most stunning places can occasionally be reached by taking the most difficult routes. I appreciate Reddit's unwavering support along this trip. During the most trying times, your words of wisdom and encouragement kept me going strong.